Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Sumerian September, Michael K. Vaughan's event. Of course, it was Michael K. Vaughan celebrating Robert E. Howard's Conan. Or, in the case of Sumerian September 2024, celebrating other people's Conan the Barbarian, because the theme of Sumerian September this year is to read Conan pastiche novels. Or Conan pastiches of any kind. I've been doing a lot, and I don't think that I could make a video for all of the Conan reading that I'm going to do in September. I'm overindulging, as I did last year. But when we're talking, since the focus here is pastiches, we're naturally starting to think about what pastiche fiction actually is. We know what it is just axiomatically. It's somebody taking creations of another writer and simply continuing their adventures. Authorized or not, that is a pastiche novel. When you are going into a world already made and writing stories in that world, regardless of what the world is. Some fiction lends itself more comfortably to pastiche fiction than others. Episodic fiction, especially, lends itself to pastiche fiction. So, Star Trek, for instance, a perfect example would be Star Trek, where you have a starship and you have a crew, and they have adventures, and those adventures are in little bottles, one per week. That lends itself naturally to a novel in which you have that same starship and that same crew go on an adventure. It doesn't necessarily affect the overarching woof of their lore. It's just something that happened to them. Well, Robert E. Howard's original conception for Conan the Barbarian was very episodic. There was this towering figure who lived prior to history. And you don't know anything about him. Nobody knows anything about this period. It was all lost in the mists of pre-time. But there was this towering figure who, in his time, was everything: a reaver, a slayer, a thief. And I'm going to tell you stories about this towering figure, and I'm not necessarily going to do them in chronological order. Here's a story of when Conan was a boy. Here's a story of when Conan was an old king, etc., etc. That naturally lends itself to pastiche, because not every adventure that Conan ever had is chronicled. It's not the same thing as, for instance, a sequential, more stately novel doesn't leave you any room for pastiche. Whereas, who knows how many adventures Tarzan had that Edgar Rice Burroughs never recorded. That's the whole idea of pastiche, is that these things really exist, and the original writer was just the recorder of them. Some works of fantasy lend themselves to that kind of treatment better than others, like, for instance, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Well, you can't do any pastiche novels about Jonathan Harker. Not that involve Dracula. We see his association with the world of Dracula pretty much in its entirety. Dracula, just in general, it's a story rather than a tapestry of adventures, so you can't really work in a pastiche novel there. You have to, I don't mean to spoil a 150-year-old book, but Dracula dies at the end. So if you're going to have a pastiche novel about him, it's going to involve mucking around with the original. Whereas truly faithful pastiches don't muck around with the original. No Conan pastiche novel or story would ever be hailed by any Conan fans if it has him losing an arm at age 20. Because then you're mucking around with the original. You don't want to do that. We're reading pastiches this month. We're concentrating on them. I'm trying to decide whether or not I consider the comic book stories to be pastiches. Of course they are. I'm strongly leaning towards spending a lot of time this month rereading Conan comic books, in addition to Conan pastiche novels, which I love. And since pastiche is at the heart of what we're talking about this month, it was only a matter of time until the waters were chummed up by the chummer-in-chief, Grammaticus Books. Came out with a video just today. It's great, as usual. I will leave a link to it down below. He comes up with his 3 laws of Conan pastiche fiction, which are really 3 thou shalt nots. 3 rules that you must not break if your Conan pastiche fiction is going to be any good. And here he refers to the old 1980s Conan movie, the Schwarzenegger movie, that I believe is responsible more than anything else for propelling Conan to immortal status in culture. And much to my surprise, because I'm pretty sure that Grammaticus Books loves that movie, he immediately says that movie violates all three of his thou shalts right away. It does. He makes the distinction in his video. I wonder if you'll think the same way, that it's not a good Conan movie, it's just a good fantasy movie. I might be willing to grant that. I don't think it's a good Conan movie at all. I myself don't think it's all that good a movie. But it's got an iconic performance from Schwarzenegger, so I guess there's no arguing with that. But his three laws are: thou shalt not portray Samaria. Don't set your story in Samaria, the icy northern realm that Conan comes from. Conan is a Sumerian, hence the title of this whole monthly event. Conan is from Samaria, but don't set your story there. Don't lift the veil of secrecy on Samaria. Grammaticus points out in his video that most of the people of the bejeweled kingdoms of Conan's day don't believe that Samaria is even a real place, or they've heard tall stories about it, but they don't think anything about its day-to-day realities. And that's good, he's saying. Conan is a northern barbarian who has come to walk amongst these southern peoples. They don't know what to make of him. They know from his accent that he's not from around here, but don't set your story in Samaria and destroy that mystique. That's rule number one. And then rule number two is don't feature another Sumerian in your story, whether you go to Samaria or not. Conan should be the only Sumerian that we see, so that we're not tempted to judge that maybe he's not all that exceptional. Maybe everybody from Samaria is just as capable and stern and stoic as he is. And then his rule number three is don't set your pastiche in Conan's boyhood. Don't tell us about his boyhood. You can start your pastiching at age 17, when he was stronger than most adult men and when he was involved in the siege of Venarium. So that is part of the Conan lore. You can maybe do that, but not any earlier than that. You can't have Conan as a 12-year-old, for instance, or anything like that. You have to stay away from Conan when he was forming into the Conan that he apparently mostly is when he leaves Samaria for the first time. In Conan lore, we learn very little about any changes that he has done. He seems to come right out of the box, factory setting, with an innate knowledge of swordsmanship and tactics and strategy. Pretty much the only thing that we learn that he learns is archery. But those are Grammaticus's three rules. Don't set your story in Samaria. Don't feature any other Sumerians, and don't talk about Conan. Don't show us Conan as a boy. Show us him fully formed. The youngest you can do is the Siege of Venarium. The youngest you can do is his late teens, when he was already strong enough to break the back of a bull and was big and brooding. You could tell that he was young, but he wasn't like a normal 17-year-old. I heard those rules, and naturally I was thinking, because Grammaticus invites us to think, I was thinking of them in context of the Schwarzenegger Conan movie. But then I thought about my beloved 2011 Conan movie starring Jason Momoa. And I realized that it breaks all three of those rules immediately, just the same as the Milius movie does, obviously intending to recapture some of that movie's magic. And do Grammaticus's rules hold up for the 2011 Jason Momoa Conan movie? I don't know that they do. Is the Conan in that movie really diminished by us seeing Samaria? And also, what about Conan as a boy? The young actor that plays Conan as a boy at the opening sequence of that movie is Conan as a boy. Is Grammaticus Books going to tell me that scene is not effective? A group of boys from the village are told that a test of their skill, their physical acumen, their athleticism, also their stoicism, will be, you must put an egg in your mouth and run a course without breaking the egg. And this younger Conan not only runs the course with all the dangers involved there in the hills and woods and rocks of Samaria, but also encounters a raiding party of warriors and fights them and wins and comes back to the village. He's smeared in guts and mud and dirt, waits a perfect beat on camera, and then spits out the egg, which you, the viewer, have forgotten about. You have forgotten that he ever had to do this. It never crosses your mind that he would go into battle and not break the egg. That's how much winning the contest meant to him. That sequence works. It really, really works. And it's quintessentially Conan. I don't see how you can discount it just because it breaks one of those rules. And I might add, as long as we're talking about Conan pastiche novels, that I think another Conan pastiche novel actually does break that rule and work. Conan the Valorous by John Maddox Roberts. A Conan pastiche novel with a really bad cover. It's not a long thing at all, but it flings down Grammaticus's rule and dances upon it, because it not only shows us Samaria and other Sumerians, but the whole novel is set in Samaria. Conan is enlisted by a sorceress to perform a particular errand of hers, not only in Samaria, but on Crom's mountain, in Crom's temple, that Sumerians never even talk about with outsiders. And we meet everybody. The novel, I think, is a perfect example of what Grammaticus doesn't want to see. Because when Conan gets to Samaria, he's meeting people that know his family, that knew him as a kid, that have names similar to his, that he meets a teenager who is very like what he was when he was that age before he left Samaria. He doesn't really feel like he fits in. And he's talking with older people who knew him when he was a boy, who can slap him on the head and scold him and whatnot. And all of these people are superbly stoic, incredibly capable wilderness warriors. We get a whole army of them by the end of the book. Literally an army. They assemble. They put aside their feuds in order to assemble together a whole crowd of Sumerians. I have to assume that if Grammaticus Books read this book, he would really hate that. He would really hate that aspect of it. Well, I wonder if he wouldn't think it was a good Conan novel. It is actually a really good Conan novel. Better than a lot of pastiche novels. A couple of scenes in there, the ending, a couple of scenes in the novel have Conan down perfect. So I'm wondering what, I view that as an exception to two of his rules. Don't show us other Sumerians, don't show us Samaria. And I view the 2011, the much forgotten, the memory hold 2011 Conan movie, the last time that anyone will ever attempt to make a Conan the Barbarian movie when Conan isn't played by a woman. I view that opening sequence for Conan the Barbarian, that movie, as very effective, and a very effective violation of yet another Grammaticus rule, because it shows us Conan as a boy, but it shows it does a good job, I think. And I'm curious to know what you think. If Grammaticus Books is going to start arguments on Sumerian September, then what do you think? What would your rules be? Maybe not just for Conan pastiche fiction, but for any pastiche fiction. Surely we can all agree on one, a basic rule of pastiche fiction, I think so basic that Grammaticus didn't think to even mention it, which is that you can't violate the original material. You can't violate the original material. Or can you? See, that's what the kind of morass we get into here. I say you can't violate the original material. You can't fundamentally change the basics of the original material. But Nicholas Meyer's movie, 7% Solution, does that for Sherlock Holmes. Is there anyone who won't say that 7% Solution isn't one of the best Sherlock Holmes pastiche movies ever made? It violates Sherlock Holmes about as fundamentally as Sherlock Holmes can be violated. And yet, it's still good pastiche. So where are we here with pastiche? What are your rules? I assume that it has to sound like the original, or maybe not. That it doesn't violate the original, or maybe not. And when it comes to Conan specifically, what do you think of Grammaticus's rules? Do you want the action to stay far away from the mist-shrouded northern realm where Conan comes from? Do you want to not see him in his nappies? I want to know. I want to know all about it. As long as we're talking about all this, Grammaticus says himself in his video that one of the things he loves about this whole weird thing that we're doing is that we get to talk about all this together and without needing to be in the same room. keep in mind, 25 years ago, if you wanted to have these kinds of animated conversations, you would either have had to gone to some mail service and take your chances, or some local convention, but you couldn't have done it at this scale so easily until now. And he loves the fact that we can argue and talk about all this stuff, and so do I. So let's hear it. What are the, as long as Sumerian September is about pastiche fiction, what are the rules? What do we think of when we think of pastiche fiction? Are there any rules? Or are we making rules and then daring a really good writer, or director in this case, to break them? I want to hear it. Tell me all. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I'll leave a link to Grammaticus' video. I think you all probably subscribe to him anyway, but it's a really good, thought-provoking video. And I'll see you soon. Thank you.